Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is going to be one of the biggest releases this year, a huge upgrade from the first game, and with that will come loads of new features. So today I thought I would go over 5 more very exciting features that are coming to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. As you all seem to enjoy the last video I did where I covered top 5 new features in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it after this one. But for now, let's jump into 5 new features coming to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The first one on my list is the reputation system. Now this obviously was in the first game, however it's had a complete rework in the second game. So in the first game, reputation was completely dependent on things you did, whether you were stealing, committing crimes, or whether you were a good Samaritan, helping people out, giving money to beggars, those kind of things. And it's relatively the same in that sense in the second game. However, the categories for the actual reputation has changed. So in the first game, it was a lot of, this is the reputation you have in this town, and that covered everyone in that town. Whereas in the second game, this has been broken down into multiple subcategories, as well as a few main ones. So the main ones we have are mills, people of the forest, and then the actual towns and villages themselves. These categories also have subcategories, like for example, the people of the forest have shepherds, gamekeepers, grave diggers, farmers, fishermen, and a bunch more here, which all have their individual reputation for Henry. Basically, any and all vocations and kinds of people that live in the countryside will have their own reputation for Henry, and this is the same for towns. So for towns, you have things like civilians, men-at-arms, and nobility. So depending on your actions amongst these groups of people, you may or may not have a good reputation with them, which will obviously affect prices for merchants, how friendly they are to you, and what information they'll give you. And this can also affect dialogue options that will be available to you, what works and what doesn't work in those dialogue situations. So for example, if you're trying to squeeze information about local bandits from a local peasant, if your reputation is really bad, they're probably not going to want to reveal that information to you. Whereas if your reputation is good in the village, they'll be more inclined to give you this info as they trust you, which is relatively how it worked in the first game, but obviously there's these different subcategories now. So if you've screwed over some farmers but been really good to the fishermen, the farmers won't like you, but the fishermen will give you what you want, including a discount on some trout, probably, maybe. Second feature on my list is a really cool one. I'm glad to see this. This is completely new for the second game, and it is belts and pouches. These are completely new armor slots for KCD2. So first up is the belt, which will actually give you up to 4 weapon slots maximum. Better belts have more slots, worse belts have less slots. So for example, a beginner belt might only give you 2 weapon slots, but a more advanced one will give you them 4 max weapon slots. And this means you can actually switch between weapons during combat. Now in combat, the more heavily armored enemies are usually more susceptible to axes or maces, any sort of blunt weaponry or things that can really carve into that plate. But in the first game, you couldn't switch weapons. You had to deal with what you had at the time and couldn't switch weapons during mid-combat, which meant if you were facing multiple types of enemies, so you had heavily armored and light armored, and you ran in with a longsword, you were stuck with that longsword even with the plated armored enemies. However, with these new weapon slots, you can now switch between those weapons. So if you have a big group of enemies, and there are some plate armor enemies and there are some leather armor enemies, you can switch to the mace for the armored enemies and switch back to the sword for those lighter armored enemies. This makes combat a bit more strategic and fluid, and is actually a great improvement on what the first game did with its combat, which is one of its standout features. Again, the second game, combat wise, it's going to be a little easier for those entry level gamers that are playing Kingdom Come Deliverance for the first time, not used to the combat, but certain things are still going to be there for those veteran players that will make the combat more interesting, especially to get really good at it. And I'm sure switching weapon types and everything like that will be one of those features that people that are gonna get really good at the combat will love. Now the other thing is the pouches. The pouch will hold food and potions, which means you can use these items on the fly. So this even means using these in combat, which was not something you could do in KCD1, because once you entered combat, you couldn't access your inventory or equip things, change equipment, use potions, things like that. So if you were low on health, you had to complete combat to bandage and heal, things like that. Whereas in KCD2, you can now heal during combat using that Marigold decoction, which is KCD's equivalent of a health potion. So again, they're making combat a little easier on that entry level, but you're still going to have that complex system that we had in the first game. It's still going to be quite hard to master the combat systems, but adding features like this, like switching between weapons, being able to use items during combat, in my opinion is a really big positive. Now, third feature on my list is quite a small one, but I'm very excited to see it in the game, and that is a photo mode feature. The first game did not have this, but a lot of games nowadays will have a photo mode, especially those nicer looking ones, to really show off the graphics of the game, and KCD2 is no different. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is looking beautiful and so graphically impressive, so I'm very glad to see this small but very cool feature make its way into the game. I think there's going to be some really cool photo opportunities, like various vistas across the Bohemian countryside during combat or siege battles. You want to get a really good look at something, admire what you're looking at. Photo mode is going to be great for that, so I can't wait to see what photos people take in this new feature in KCD2. Fourth feature on my list is we're going to finally go in depth into the crime and punishment system, at least what I know so far. So if you commit crimes and don't get caught, people will still become suspicious of you, especially if you look rougher or have a more suspicious look about you, you're more dirty, you're wearing rougher clothes, things like that. But word has to spread that you committed a crime in your area. So for example, if you're in Kuttenberg, you're on one side of the city and you maybe commit a murder in an alleyway and some random civilian sees you and you quickly run away to the other side of the city and get seen by a guard, that guard, because he's on the other side of the city, word hasn't reached him that someone's been murdered in an alleyway, he's not gonna actually be suspicious of you because he doesn't know that there's been a murder on the other side of town, even though someone saw you do it. So word actually has to spread of your crimes before you can get punished for it, before people start to become suspicious of Henry. If you do get caught, however, you can sort of become wanted, and there are various punishments depending on the severity and frequency of your crimes. Those punishments range from being put up in the stockades and having fruit and veg thrown at you, spending multiple days in that courtyard just locked up, bent over, and villagers can just throw whatever they want at you. You can be caned, so you'll be chained to a pole in the town square again most likely, and caned along the back as punishment. This probably will have repercussions in terms of stats. You might be debuffed for a few days if you are caned. Same with the stockade, there'll be some sort of debuff for a few days. And if your crimes are so severe and you're committing crimes so frequently, you can even be hung and executed. So if you're thinking of playing Henry like a dirty criminal, you're gonna have to be a lot more careful in the second game as opposed to the first game. Things like fines are still there as punishments for those lighter crimes, like for example not having a torch out during the night. But if you start murdering multiple villagers, those punishments will start to build up, and the game will become much more difficult to get around in. And obviously there are various crimes for you to commit in KCD2, things like lockpicking into people's houses, pickpocketing them, murdering them, just having a fight with someone when you're not meant to, not having a torch out at night, and also stealing and selling horses, which is also a small feature that has been added into KCD2, which wasn't in the first game. And the fifth and final feature on my list is the battle cry. That's right, you can now yell obscenely in combat against enemies. Roleplay wise, I think it's a great feature to have in the game. Just yelling for glory or for Hans Capon or something like that is going to be an extremely fun and exciting thing to do in the game as a roleplay feature, but it also has a gameplay mechanic to it. If combat is going well for you, you're covered in blood and heavily armored, using a battle cry could make an enemy flee the battle. But even if you aren't as well geared or not as rough looking, but combat is going really well for you, you've got them on their last ropes, using a battle cry can also make them flee, sort of end the combat early, or they might just surrender to you. There are also perks that go along with this mechanic, including unlocking new things to say as battle cries, like this one. I feel quite hungry! Thank you, Warhorse Studios, for making Henry yell this. My goodness, what a feature to have in the game. And those are 5 new features that are very exciting that are coming to KCD2. I cannot wait for this game, man. It's just such an upgrade from the first game, and there are going to be tons of new features, but let me know in the comments down below what your favorite new feature in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is going to be. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 content. We're going to be doing a lot of content on this game leading up to the release, and once the game releases there's going to be loads more, so subscribe for that. Become a member today if you want to support me in another way. You'll get early access videos and live streams, and thank you so much for watching this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!